Here's something engaging for your YouTube video introduction. The courtroom was silent, the air thick with tension. All eyes were on the small girl standing in the witness box, her tiny hands gripping the wooden railing. At just 8 years old, she looked almost out of place in such a serious setting. But when she opened her mouth to speak, no one was prepared for what she was about to say. This wasn't just any trial. It was a case that had captured the attention of everyone in town, drawing reporters, lawyers, and spectators eager to see how it would unfold. Her father sat at the defendant's table, his face lined with worry, his eyes never leaving his daughter. He wasn't just fighting for his freedom, he was fighting for the truth. And now, it seemed, the fate of the entire case rested on the words of this little girl. The judge peered down at her, his expression unreadable. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman in a crisp suit, folded her arms, waiting. The defense attorney, her father's lawyer, adjusted his glasses, choosing his next words carefully. "Can you tell the court your name?" he asked gently. The girl took a deep breath. "Emma," she said, her voice steady. "Emma Carter." The judge nodded. "And do you understand why you're here today?" Emma swallowed hard, but didn't hesitate. "Yes, sir. I'm here to tell the truth." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. No one had expected her to be this calm, this composed. The prosecutor leaned forward slightly, as if trying to read her mind. What truth could a child possibly know that would change everything? Emma turned her head, glancing at her father. He gave her the smallest of nods, his expression full of love, but also concern. He knew what she was about to say, and he also knew the risk. The accusations against him were serious, too serious, and yet the evidence was weak, built on assumptions and twisted facts. He had told the truth from the beginning, but the truth didn't always win in court. Not unless someone was brave enough to stand up for it. And now that someone was his own daughter. The defense attorney continued, his voice measured. "Emma, I know this is difficult, but I need you to tell the court what you saw that night." The little girl's hands tightened on the railing. She looked around the room, seeing strangers staring back at her, waiting for her words to determine what would happen next. But Emma wasn't afraid. She knew what she had seen, and she wasn't going to let anyone twist it into something it wasn't. She took another deep breath. That night, she started, her voice clear and unwavering. And then she said something that made the entire courtroom gasp. This moment changed everything. What did Emma say? And how did it shake the case to its core? Stay with us to find out, because this is a story you won't forget. The room fell into a stunned silence. Some people shifted in their seats. Others exchanged quick glances, their expressions a mix of confusion and curiosity. The judge's gavel hadn't come down yet, but the weight of Emma's words had already sent a ripple through the courtroom. Her father sat frozen, his breath caught in his chest. He had prepared for this moment, but nothing could have braced him for how powerful his daughter's voice would sound when she finally spoke. The prosecutor, who had been leaning back in her chair with a confident smirk just moments before, suddenly looked more alert. She adjusted her papers, her fingers drumming against the table as she studied the young girl. This wasn't going the way she had expected. The defense attorney kept his gaze steady. "Emma, can you repeat that? So everyone in the courtroom can hear you clearly." Emma nodded, her hands gripping the wooden railing even tighter. She glanced at her father once more, and this time there was no hesitation. "I saw what happened that night," she said again. "And my dad didn't do anything wrong." A few whispers spread through the crowd. The judge cleared his throat, signaling for silence. He was an older man, experienced, someone who had seen all kinds of cases in his courtroom. But even he looked intrigued now. The defense attorney took a step forward. "Emma, tell us everything you remember about that night." Start from the beginning. Emma took a deep breath. It was late, she said, her voice steady. I was supposed to be in bed, but I couldn't sleep. So I got up and went to the living room. Her small fingers twisted around each other as she spoke. The memory was clear in her mind, like a movie playing over and over again. I heard voices outside, she continued. At first, I thought it was just someone walking by, but then I realized it wasn't. It sounded like an argument. The prosecutor leaned forward, her pen tapping against her legal pad. And where was your father? She asked, cutting in before the defense attorney could respond. Emma blinked but didn't falter. He was inside with me, she said firmly. He was asleep on the couch. The defense attorney gave the prosecutor a pointed look before turning back to Emma. So when you heard these voices outside, what did you do? I went to the window, she admitted. I was careful, so no one could see me. Her voice dropped slightly, and the entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. There were two people, she continued. I couldn't see their faces at first, but they were arguing really loud. One of them kept saying, "This isn't over." The other one told him to leave before something bad happened. Emma paused for a second, as if she could still hear their voices echoing in her head. And then she whispered, "One of them ran away." The defense attorney nodded. And the other one? Emma hesitated. He stayed for a little while. I think he was looking around. And then he left too. The prosecutor stood up, her expression unreadable. Emma, she said, her voice calm but firm, you're absolutely sure about this? Emma lifted her chin. Yes. The prosecutor glanced at her notes before looking back at the little girl. You said your father was asleep on the couch. Emma nodded. Then how do you know he wasn't involved? Emma frowned, her small fingers gripping the railing even tighter. Because I was there, she said, her voice sharp now. He never left the house. He never went outside. He was right there the whole time. A hush fell over the courtroom. The prosecutor didn't respond right away. She just stared at the little girl as if trying to find cracks in her story. The defense attorney took the moment to press on. Emma, you said you couldn't see their faces at first. But did you ever see them clearly? Emma hesitated, then nodded. Yes. The room grew even quieter. Even the judge was leaning forward now. The defense attorney took a breath. Did you recognize them? Emma glanced at her father again. Her lip trembled slightly, but she steadied herself. One of them, she admitted. The prosecutor's eyes sharpened. Who? Emma swallowed. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest. I don't know his name, she said softly, but I've seen him before. The defense attorney took another step forward. Where? Emma's voice was barely above a whisper now. Near my school. Outside our house sometimes. I think he was watching us. The courtroom exploded into whispers again. The judge slammed his gavel down. Order. The prosecutor's face had lost some of its confidence. The case had seemed simple before, a man accused, evidence pointing in one direction. But now, a new mystery was unfolding right in front of them. Who was the man Emma had seen? And more importantly, what was he really after? The defense attorney turned back to Emma. You said you heard one of them say, "This isn't over." Are you sure? Emma nodded. Yes. The prosecutor was watching her closely now. Emma, I need you to think very carefully, she said. Could you have been mistaken? Maybe you were dreaming. Emma's eyes flashed. I wasn't dreaming. Her voice was so firm that even the prosecutor seemed taken aback. The little girl wasn't confused. She wasn't unsure. She knew exactly what she had seen. The judge looked toward the attorneys. I think we've heard enough for today, he said. The tension in the room was thick as people started murmuring again. Emma stepped down from the witness stand, her small shoulders straight, her chin high. She had told the truth. That was all she could do. But as she walked back toward her seat, she felt something strange. Someone was watching her. Her small fingers curled into fists. And when she turned her head slightly, she saw a pair of eyes in the crowd, someone staring right at her. Someone who didn't look happy. Who was he? And why did he seem so interested in what she had just said? The answers were coming, but not yet. Emma's heartbeat quickened as she locked eyes with a stranger in the crowd. His stare wasn't just casual curiosity. There was something behind it, something dark. A flicker of recognition flashed through her mind, but before she could place it, the man turned away, disappearing into the sea of people exiting the courtroom. She tugged on her father's sleeve as he stood beside his lawyer, speaking in hushed tones. "Dad," she whispered, her voice almost too soft to hear. "That man, he was watching me." Her father turned, scanning the room, but the man was already gone. His brow furrowed as he looked back at her. "What man, sweetheart?" Emma shook her head. "I don't know, but I've seen him before." The lawyer, a middle-aged man with sharp eyes, crouched down beside her. "Where have you seen him, Emma? Think carefully." Emma chewed her lip, trying to remember. "Outside my school. And outside our house. I think he was watching us." Her father stiffened. The lawyer exchanged a glance with him, his expression darkening. "We need to be careful," he murmured. Emma didn't understand everything that was happening, but she could feel it. The tension in the air, the way the adults' voices dropped lower as if someone might be listening. She wasn't just testifying for her dad anymore. Something bigger was going on. As they left the courthouse, reporters swarmed them, cameras flashing, microphones shoved forward. "Mr. Carter, how do you feel about your daughter's testimony? Do you think this will change the direction of the trial? Is it true the prosecution is questioning her credibility?" Emma flinched at the chaos. Her father tightened his grip on her hand, shielding her from the cameras as they pushed through the crowd. The lawyer cleared a path, guiding them toward the car. Once they were safely inside, Emma finally let out the breath she'd been holding. "Why do they keep saying I might be lying?" she asked, her voice small. Her father sighed, rubbing his face. "Because the truth isn't always what people want to hear." The ride home was silent, but Emma couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in her chest. Something wasn't right. That night, as she lay in bed, she thought about everything. The voices she had heard that night, the man in the courtroom, the way the prosecutor had tried to make her doubt herself. Her father was innocent. She knew it. But if that was true, then the real question was, who was guilty? Sleep didn't come easy. A noise outside made her sit up, her heart pounding. She crept to her window, peeking through the blinds. The street was mostly empty, just a few parked cars. But then movement caught her eye. A figure stood near the streetlight, just far enough away that she couldn't make out his face. He wasn't walking. He wasn't leaving. He was just standing there, watching. Emma swallowed hard, backing away from the window. Her father had told her not to be afraid, that everything would be okay. But standing in the darkness of her room, she wasn't so sure. The next day at school, she couldn't concentrate. The whispers followed her everywhere. Some of the kids had seen the news, heard their parents talking. She's the one from the trial. Do you think her dad really did it? What if she's making stuff up? Emma clenched her fists, trying to ignore them. They didn't know the truth. But the doubt in their voices made something inside her chest tighten. At lunchtime, she sat alone until a voice broke through her thoughts. "Emma." She looked up. It was Daniel, a boy from her class. He hesitated before sitting down across from her. "I saw you on TV," he said quietly. Emma tensed, bracing herself for another mean comment. But instead, he lowered his voice. "I believe you." Her eyes widened. "You do?" He nodded. "I heard something too. That night." Emma's breath caught. "What did you hear?" Daniel glanced around before leaning in. "I live 2 houses down from you. I was outside that night, riding my bike in my driveway. I heard voices, just like you did. But then I heard something else." Emma swallowed. "What?" Daniel's expression darkened. "A car. Right after the voices stopped, it sped away really fast." Emma felt her stomach drop. "Did you see who was inside?" He shook his head. "No, but the car, it wasn't from around here. I've never seen it before." A chill ran down Emma's spine. Someone had been there that night. Someone who had left in a hurry. And now that same someone might be watching her. That afternoon, when she got home, she told her father everything Daniel had said. His face grew serious as he listened, his jaw tightening. "Emma, I don't want you walking home alone from school anymore," he said finally. "I'll come pick you up every day." She knew better than to argue. Something was happening, something bigger than she could fully understand. And the more she learned, the more dangerous it felt. That evening, her father made a phone call. She listened from the hallway, trying to make out the conversation. "I think she's in danger," he was saying. "We need to find out who's behind this before it's too late." The word sent a shiver down her spine. She stepped back, returning to her room, but the uneasy feeling wouldn't go away. Outside, the streetlight flickered. And in the distance, a shadow moved. Emma lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to shake the feeling that something was closing in. The house was quiet, but it didn't feel safe. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside sent a shiver down her spine. Her father had checked the locks 3 times before going to bed, but that didn't stop the unease curling in her stomach. Her mind kept replaying Daniel's words. A car had sped away that night. Someone had been there, someone who didn't want to be seen. And now someone was watching her. She knew it. The thought made her sit up, throwing off her blankets. She tiptoed to the window, pushing the curtain aside just enough to peek out. The street was dimly lit, empty except for the parked cars lining the curb. But then, movement. A figure near the corner, half hidden by the shadows. Her breath caught in her throat. It was the same person from before. She was sure of it. He wasn't walking by, wasn't passing through. He was waiting. Emma's heart pounded as she backed away from the window. She needed to tell her dad. She turned toward the door. A sudden noise outside made her freeze. A metallic clatter, like something being knocked over. The trash cans. She held her breath, listening. The house was silent, but outside, footsteps. Slow, careful, someone was close. Emma's pulse raced. She didn't know what to do. Should she wake her dad? Call the police? Then came a sound that made her stomach drop. The faint, unmistakable click of a gate latch being lifted. The backyard. She moved before she could think, running down the hallway. "Dad," she whispered urgently, shaking him awake. "Someone's outside." Her father bolted upright, instantly alert. He didn't ask questions. He just moved. He grabbed his phone, rushing to the back door, carefully peeking through the curtain. Emma stood behind him, heart hammering in her chest. The backyard looked empty. The gate was closed, but they had both heard it. Her father hesitated, then slowly unlocked the door, stepping outside. The air was thick with silence, as if the whole world was holding its breath. He scanned the yard, checking behind the bushes, near the fence. Nothing. Emma stayed in the doorway, her hands gripping the frame. "Dad, be careful," she whispered. He nodded but didn't stop searching. Then he noticed something. The gate latch. It wasn't closed all the way. Someone had been there. Her father's face darkened as he carefully reset the latch, making sure it was secure. He turned back to her. "Go inside, Emma." She obeyed, but the fear didn't leave her. She stood in the kitchen, watching as he double-checked the locks. "Do you think it was him?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. "I don't know, but I'm not taking any chances." The rest of the night passed in uneasy silence. Emma couldn't sleep, and neither could her father. He stayed by the window, watching, waiting. The next morning, the tension hadn't lifted. At school, Daniel found her before class. "I was right," he said in a low voice. "The car, I saw it again last night." Emma's stomach tightened. "Where?" "Down the street. It wasn't parked, just sitting there with the lights off." She swallowed hard. "Did you see who was inside?" Daniel shook his head. "It drove away before I could." Emma's hands clenched. Someone was watching them. Watching her. But why? That afternoon, when her father came to pick her up, his face was tense. "We're going to the lawyer's office," he said as soon as she got in the car. Emma didn't argue. She knew whatever was happening was getting worse. At the lawyer's office, the air was thick with urgency. Her father explained everything: the man in the courtroom, the car, the noises outside. The lawyer listened, nodding slowly. "This isn't just about the trial anymore," he said finally. "Someone is trying to scare you. Or worse, keep Emma quiet." Emma's blood ran cold. The lawyer tapped his fingers on the desk. "We need to bring this to the police. If someone is following Emma, we need them involved before it escalates." Her father nodded. "I agree." He turned to Emma, his eyes full of worry. "Sweetheart, I need you to be extra careful. Don't talk to strangers. Don't go anywhere alone. If you see that man again, you tell me immediately." Emma nodded, but the fear in her chest was growing. This wasn't just about her dad's innocence anymore. It was about something much bigger. Something dangerous. That night, as she lay in bed, she kept the lamp on. Every noise made her flinch. She felt like a storm was coming, one she couldn't stop. And outside, under the dim glow of the streetlights, a car sat parked. Engine off, lights out. Waiting. Emma lay awake, her heartbeat thudding in her ears. The glow from her bedside lamp cast long shadows across the walls, but it didn't make her feel any safer. She knew the car was out there. She could feel it. The thought made her stomach twist. She wanted to check the window, to see if the shadowy figure was watching again. But the fear of what she might find kept her frozen under the covers. What if this time he wasn't just watching? What if he was getting closer? Minutes stretched into hours. Eventually, exhaustion pulled at her, and despite the fear gnawing at her chest, her eyelids grew heavy. She drifted into uneasy sleep. Sometime in the middle of the night, a noise jolted her awake. A sharp asterisk tap asterisk against glass. Her breath caught. Had she imagined it? She turned her head slowly, her eyes locking onto the window. Her room was on the second floor. No one should be able to reach it. And yet, the sound had been real. Then, another asterisk tap asterisk. Emma's body went rigid. She knew she should scream, wake her dad, asterisk do asterisk something. But fear kept her still. Her fingers clutched the blanket as she stared at the glass, heart pounding in her throat. A shadow moved just beyond the window. She gasped, scrambling backward, nearly tumbling off the bed. Panic surged through her. This wasn't like before. This wasn't just someone in a car or on the sidewalk. This was different. She took a shaky breath, forcing herself to move. She needed to wake her dad. She bolted for the door, but before she could open it, asterisk tap asterisk. Her head snapped back to the window, but this time she saw it clearly. A hand, pressed against the glass. She choked back a scream and flung open the door, racing down the hall. "Dad," she cried, her voice shaking. Her father was already up, his face tense as he met her in the hallway. "What is it?" Someone's at my window," his eyes darkened. He didn't hesitate. Grabbing the baseball bat he kept near his room, he rushed toward her window. Emma stayed in the hallway, heart pounding as she heard him fling it open. Silence. Then, "No one's here." Emma crept forward, peeking into her room. Her father was leaning halfway out the window, scanning the yard below. The night was still, the street empty. No sign of anyone. Her father pulled back inside, locking the window tight. "Are you sure you saw someone?" Emma nodded quickly. "There was a hand, Dad." "Right there." She pointed at the glass. Her father's jaw tightened. Then whoever it was, they're gone now. But Emma could tell he wasn't convinced. He didn't want to scare her, but she could see the worry in his eyes. "I'm calling the police," he muttered, grabbing his phone. Emma sat on the bed, her hands shaking as she wrapped her arms around herself. This wasn't just some coincidence. Someone wanted her scared. Someone wanted her silent. By the time the police arrived, the mysterious visitor was long gone. The officers searched the yard, checked the locks, asked her questions. Did she see a face? Did she recognize the hand? Did she hear footsteps? But Emma could only shake her head. "I just felt them watching," she whispered. The officers exchanged a glance. "We'll patrol the area tonight," one of them promised. "But if anything happens again, call us immediately." As they left, Emma turned to her dad. "What if they come back?" Her father didn't answer right away. He just pulled her into a hug, holding her close. "We won't let them," he murmured. But his voice held the same fear Emma felt. The next morning, the tension hadn't lifted. At school, Emma was exhausted, her mind racing through everything that had happened. She barely heard the teacher, barely touched her lunch. Then Daniel appeared at her table. He hesitated before sitting across from her. "Emma," he said quietly, "something weird happened last night." She looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" He glanced around, making sure no one was listening. "I couldn't sleep, so I looked outside. That car, the one I told you about, it was there again." Emma's heart pounded. "Did you see who was inside?" Daniel swallowed hard. "That's the thing. The driver got out this time." She leaned in. "Who was it?" He hesitated. "I couldn't see their face. They had a hood on, but they weren't alone." Emma's blood ran cold. There was someone else asterisk. Daniel nodded. "And they weren't just standing around this time. They were walking toward your house." Emma's breath caught. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I tried," Daniel said. "But right before I could, something happened. A second car pulled up. It was weird, like they weren't expecting it. The first person, whoever they were, got spooked and left." Emma's mind raced. "A second car?" Daniel nodded. "Yeah, and the way they stopped, it was like they were watching the first one. Like they knew something was about to happen." A cold chill ran through Emma. This wasn't just about the trial. This was bigger. She clenched her fists. Someone was after her, but someone else was watching them too. And the question that terrified her most was, who? Emma's heart pounded as she stared at Daniel. The fear that had been simmering beneath the surface for so long was now boiling over. Someone was following her, watching her house. But now there was someone else, another force in the shadows, one she didn't understand. Her father picked her up from school that day, and the moment she got into the car, she told him everything. The second car, the hooded figure getting out, the way they had seemed startled by the arrival of someone else. Her father listened in tense silence, his grip tightening around the steering wheel. "We're not waiting any longer," he said firmly. "We're going to the police station now." Emma felt a flicker of relief. Maybe finally this nightmare would end. But that feeling didn't last long. As they drove, Emma glanced out the window. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Just the usual cars, people walking, life moving on as if nothing was wrong. But then she saw it. A dark-colored sedan, 3 cars behind them, keeping the same steady pace. "Dad," she whispered, her throat dry. "I think we're being followed." Her father didn't turn his head. Instead, he adjusted the rearview mirror, his eyes narrowing. "I see it," he muttered. His voice was calm, but Emma could tell he was anything but. He turned at the next street. The car followed. Another turn, still there. Emma's pulse raced. What do we do? Her father inhaled deeply, then suddenly pressed his foot on the gas, making a sharp turn onto a busier road. Horns blared as other cars swerved, but he didn't slow down. Emma twisted in her seat, looking back. The sedan hesitated at the turn, just for a moment. Then it sped up, following them again. "They're not giving up," Emma whispered. Her father's jaw tightened. "No, they're not." They were getting closer to the police station, but Emma's mind was spinning. Who was in that car? The person who had been watching her, or the second presence, the one who had scared the first away? Then just as they reached the final intersection before the station, the unexpected happened. Another car came out of nowhere, cutting off the sedan behind them. Tires screeched, horns blared, and for the first time, their pursuers were forced to stop. Her father took the chance. He floored the gas pedal, speeding straight to the station. By the time they pulled into the lot, Emma was shaking. They rushed inside, and the officers barely had time to ask what was happening before Emma's father started explaining everything. The threats, the break-in, the shadow outside her window, the 2 different cars. The officer listening didn't dismiss them. Instead, he exchanged a look with another officer before standing up. "We need you both to come with us," he said. "There's something you need to know." Emma's stomach dropped. "What is it?" The officer hesitated. "You're not the only ones who've reported strange activity connected to your case." Emma and her father exchanged a stunned glance. The officer led them to a different room, pulling out a file. "We've been keeping tabs on an individual we believe may have been involved in tampering with evidence from your father's case," he explained. "But we also discovered someone else has been watching *them*. Emma's breath caught. "The second car?" The officer nodded. "We believe whoever was following you tonight isn't trying to hurt you. They're trying to protect you." Emma's mind spun. Someone had been watching her, but not as a threat. As a warning. As a shield. But who? Just then, another officer walked in. "We've identified the driver of the sedan," he announced. "They just turned up at the hospital, injured but alive. Looks like they were run off the road by whoever was following them." Emma's father tensed. "Who was it?" The officer hesitated, then said a name that made Emma's blood run cold. "The prosecution's lead investigator." Emma's entire body went stiff. The man who had built the case against her father. The man who had insisted he was guilty. The one who had fought so hard to put him behind bars. Her father's voice was tight. "You're saying the investigator was the one following us?" The officer nodded. And based on what we found, we have reason to believe they weren't acting alone. Emma's chest tightened. The case had always felt unfair, but it wasn't just bias. It wasn't just bad luck. It was something much bigger. Someone had wanted her father in jail, badly enough to manipulate the case, to silence Emma, to make sure no one ever questioned the truth. And someone else had known. Emma swallowed hard. Who's the other person? The officer sighed. That's what we're trying to figure out. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then her father took a deep breath. So what happens now? The officer met his gaze. Now we reopen the case. Emma felt a weight lift off her chest, but at the same time, new fear settled in. They were closer to the truth, but whoever was behind this wasn't going to let go easily. And somewhere out there, in the shadows, the person who had been protecting her was still watching. Emma sat in the police station, her hands wrapped around a cup of water she hadn't touched. Her father sat beside her, staring at the floor, his mind clearly racing. The officers were still talking, making phone calls, preparing for what came next. But all Emma could think about was how much everything had changed in a matter of hours. For so long, she had felt powerless. Like no matter what she did, the truth would never come out. But now it was clear her father had been framed. Someone had gone to great lengths to make sure he was found guilty. And when Emma had come too close to figuring it out, they had tried to scare her into silence. But they had failed. The officer returned and sat across from them. His expression was serious, but not unkind. "We're officially launching an internal investigation," he said. "We have enough evidence to suspect that members of the prosecution may have acted in bad faith." Her father let out a slow breath. "What does that mean for my case?" The officer hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "It means your conviction will be re-examined. If we find proof of misconduct, there's a strong chance you'll be exonerated." Emma's heart clenched. It wasn't a promise, but it was more hope than they had ever been given before. That night, they went home under police protection. Officers parked outside their house, making sure no one could try anything else. But Emma still couldn't sleep. She sat up in bed, staring at the window, half expecting another shadow to appear. But no one came. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Investigators dug through old files, questioning people who had once seemed untouchable. Slowly, the truth began to emerge. The original case against Emma's father had been built on shaky ground, and now, with fresh eyes, the inconsistencies were glaring. Witness statements had been altered. Evidence had gone missing. And the man who had been following them that night, the prosecution's investigator, was at the center of it all. As the investigation deepened, it became clear that he hadn't acted alone. Higher-ups in the legal system had turned a blind eye, allowing the case to go through without question. But someone had seen the corruption for what it was. Someone had been trying to protect Emma and her father. And then, one day, they found out who. It happened at the police station, weeks after the night of the car chase. Emma and her father had been called in to give another statement when an officer approached them. "There's someone who wants to talk to you," he said. Emma exchanged a glance with her dad before following the officer into a back room. Sitting there, hands folded on the table, was a woman. She was older, maybe in her 50s, with sharp eyes that softened when she saw Emma. "Who are you?" Emma asked hesitantly. The woman sighed. "My name is Detective Harris," she said. "I used to work for the prosecution's office." Emma felt her father stiffen beside her. "I was assigned to your father's case years ago," Detective Harris continued. "At first, I believed the evidence. I believed he was guilty. But the more I looked into it, the more things didn't add up." Emma swallowed hard. "So why didn't you say anything?" The detective's face darkened. I tried, she admitted. But the people running the case were powerful. They made it clear that if I kept asking questions, my career would be over. Emma's stomach twisted. So you stayed quiet. For a while, Harris admitted. But when I saw your father's appeal denied, when I saw you fighting so hard to prove his innocence, I couldn't stay quiet anymore. Emma's mind was spinning. You were the second car, she whispered. The detective nodded. I've been watching the people involved in this case for a long time. When I realized someone was trying to intimidate you, I knew I had to step in. Her father's voice was hoarse. Why now? Detective Harris met his gaze. Because the truth asterisk always asterisk comes out, she said. And it was time. It took months, but in the end, the truth won. With new evidence of corruption and misconduct, Emma's father's conviction was overturned. The real guilty party, the person the prosecution had been protecting, was finally arrested. And the investigator who had spent years covering it up was sentenced for his crimes. The day Emma's father walked free, the sky was bright and clear. A small crowd had gathered outside the courthouse, reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing. But Emma ignored all of it. She only cared about one thing. Her father, stepping out of the courthouse, truly free for the first time in years. She ran to him, throwing her arms around him as he hugged her tightly. You did it, Emma, he whispered. You never gave up. Tears burned in her eyes, but she smiled. We did it. As they walked away from the courthouse together, Emma glanced around, half expecting to see Detective Harris somewhere in the crowd. But she wasn't there. She was gone, just like she had always been, watching from the shadows, ensuring justice was finally served. And for the first time in a long time, Emma felt safe.